Hello and welcome to the Christ Baptist Church Devotional. We're back on track here with Genesis chapter 26. We've gone through 25 chapters of Genesis, so not a small task going through this large book, but it's the book of origins, the beginnings. We saw how God created the earth, how sin entered the world, and how God judged the earth. He basically let sin have its reign, and which is attempting to break everything and put everything into chaos. But God promised to deliver in Genesis chapter 3, verse 15. Coming from the line of Eve. There's going to be a seed coming from Eve, and her seed will crush the seed of the serpent, will crush the seed of that great adversary, Satan. And it was a serpent, and taken the form of a serpent, but we see that happening, and then culture then began to develop in chapters 4 or 5, and it grew significantly to where Satan was trying to corrupt the world. God flooded the world, chapters 6 to 9, and he made a covenant with Noah and all of creation, saying he'll never again flood the earth, which is why we never worry about whether the flood waters or the waters of the oceans are going to flood up and going to go into our cities. It's just not going to happen, because God promised that that is not going to happen. He'll never again flood the earth with water. Well, we saw that carry on, and after people recovered and the earth began to populate again, the Tower of Babel kicked in, and people were just rebelling against the Lord. And through that great rebellion, God chose a man, Abram, randomly, it seems, not because of anything he did. And he chose Abraham, and what we see is the life of faith of Abraham as he walked with God, and God grew his faith. God dealt with him in his sins, and he's having to face the consequences of his sins because he didn't listen to God. He listened to the wife that he had, Sarah, and he impregnated Hagar and had Ishmael, and Ishmael is now there and is causing him lots of grief throughout his life and through the life of Isaac, his son of the promise that came in. Well, God promised to Abraham he'd have many generations of descendants, starting with Isaac, one, and then he's going to move from there. And Isaac, we saw, had two sons, Jacob and Esau, twins. So we see Isaac waiting 40 years before he's married, 20 more years before he has a son, and then he has two of them. Abraham had to wait 100 years before his first son, waiting for the promise, and that's what we see. We find ourselves now, after some history with Jacob and Esau, what it was for Esau to despise his birthright. He was firstborn, but he didn't want to carry that privilege of being the first in the family and having the honor and maybe being the one to carry the seed. So he despised being the firstborn of Isaac. And we saw in Hebrews how that has great effect. And now here we are in Genesis 26, and we see history repeating itself, but there's really a picture here of two lines that are taking shape. One which really despised the birthright, and one which really cherished the birthright, purchased the birthright, wanted the birthright. But yet, both men, especially the one who purchased the birthright, he's not necessarily a righteous man, for sure. Meaning he's not acting in a way that we would say is commendable. But we're now here with Isaac moving on to where he has Jacob and Esau. But he's now moving, and he's doing exactly what his father did. Exactly what his father did. But God did exactly what God did with his father. Here, let's take a look. Isaac is now, chapter 26, verse 1. Now there was a famine in the land, besides the previous famine that had occurred in the days of Abraham. So Isaac went to Gerar, to Abimelech, king of the Philistines. Here we are again, to Abimelech, the king of the Philistines. The Lord appeared to him and said, "Do not go down to Egypt. Stay in the land of which I shall tell you. Sojourn in this land, and I'll be with you and bless you. For to you and your descendants I will give all these lands, and I'll establish the oath which I swore to your father Abraham. I'll multiply your descendants as the stars of heaven, and will give your descendants all these lands, and by your descendants all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. Because Abraham obeyed me and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws." So here we see the same promise given to Abraham, now given to Isaac, child of the promise. So Isaac lived in Gerar, verse 6 tells us. He didn't go down to Egypt, he stayed there. But again, this is the same place essentially where Abraham got away from a famine, and the same place that Abraham gave up his wife to people of the land because she was so beautiful. So look what Isaac, the son, says. When the men of the place asked about his wife, he said, "She's my sister," for he was afraid to say, "my wife," thinking the men of this place will kill me on account of Rebekah, for she's beautiful. Same problem, wasn't it? Same fear, not trusting God. It came about, when he'd been there a long time, that Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked out through the window and saw, behold, Isaac was caressing his wife Rebekah. So in this case, he didn't give her up to somebody, but he told everybody she was his sister. And then he was caught out, actually being tender to his wife and caressing her, it says, right there in kind of in public view. So Abimelech called Isaac in verse 9 and said, "Behold, certainly she is your wife. How then can you say she's my sister?" And Isaac said to him, "Because I said I might die on account of her." Abimelech said, "What is this you've done to us? One of the people might easily have lain with your wife, and you would have brought guilt upon us. Here we thought you came here, and now you put us at risk." No doubt, this king here understood and heard what had happened with the previous king, with Abraham, and the problems that came, and the curse that came, and oh my. "What have you done to us?" he says. Verse 11, so Abimelech charged all the people, saying, "He who touches this man or his wife shall surely be put to death." Now Isaac sowed in that land and reaped in the same year 100-fold, and the Lord blessed him. The man became rich and continued to grow richer until he became very wealthy. He had possessions of flocks and herds and a great household, so that the Philistines envied him. Now all the wells which his father's servants had dug in the days of Abraham his father, the Philistines stopped up by filling them with earth. Then Abimelech said to Isaac, "Go away from us, for you are too powerful for us." And Isaac departed from there and camped in the valley of Gerar and settled there. This is a picture of God walking with Isaac, protecting him, protecting his wife, and the nations, the people around him, are afraid of him because of his wealth and how he's growing. And now we're seeing some hostility come. The wells of which his father's servants had dug up in the days of Abraham, the Philistines stopped them up by filling them with earth. We don't want to, Abraham needs to get out of here. So we see God protecting and moving his covenant along despite what Isaac did. He followed exactly in the sins of his father. But the promise stands supreme. We see another thing happen that's very similar to what happened in Genesis 21 with Abraham. Verse 18, then Isaac dug again the wells of water which had been dug in the days of his father Abraham. For the Philistines had stopped them up after the death of Abraham, and he gave them the names which his father had given them. But when Isaac's servants dug in the valley and found there a well of flowing water, the herdsmen of Gerar quarreled with the herdsmen of Isaac, saying, "The water is ours." So he named the well Esek, because they contended with him. Then they dug another well, and they quarreled over it too, so he named it Sitnah. He moved away from there and dug another well, and they did not quarrel over it, so he named it Rehoboth. For he said, "At the last, the Lord has made room for us, and will be fruitful in the land." Then he went up from there to Beersheba. And Beersheba, remember, that's where Abraham also made a covenant with Abimelech, and they got together. So all these towns, everything is connected, and they're circling back, and it's following the same history, but God is faithful and patient through this, moving his covenant along. Verse 24, the Lord appeared to him the same night and said, "I am the God of your father Abraham. Do not fear, for I am with you. I'll bless you and multiply your descendants for the sake of my servant Abraham." So he built an altar there, called upon the name of the Lord, pitched his tent there, and there Isaac's servants dug a well. So he had hostility from the neighboring herdsmen that fought over wells, and Isaac, he didn't want to make a fight, so he just kept moving and moving and moving until he finally got to where, okay, now we have our own well and it's going to be okay. God protected him in this. Even when he was getting persecution from others, God caused him not to be in a big fight. And he kept moving until he found something where he could have peace, and so he's not going to fight over all of these wells. So he kept moving and moving until verse 22. He found a well that nobody would fight over, and that would sustain him. Well, verse 26, here comes Abimelech again. Then Abimelech came to him from Gerar with his advisor Ahuzah and Phicol, the commander of his army. Isaac said to them, "Why have you come to me, since You hate me and have sent me away from you. Jealousy already. Because they're seeing the promise. God blessing Isaac. Now there's jealousy there. There's animosity. They said, we see plainly that the Lord has been with you. So we said, let there now be an oath between us, even between you and us, and let us make a covenant with you. You see, when people see that the Lord is with you, they might not like it. They might not like it because they're jealous. They're saying he's not with me. But you know what they will do? They'll attach themselves to you. They'll do business with you. They'll realize, I need to kind of hitch my wagon to this horse because I see great blessing there. They said, we see plainly that the Lord's been with you. So we said, let us now be an oath between us, even between you and us, and let's make a covenant with you, that you'll do us no harm, just as we have not touched you and have done to you nothing but good, and have sent you away in peace. You are now the blessed of the Lord. You are now the blessed of the Lord. Already a witness to all the people recognizing this promise is taking effect. And he is actually a witness to the Lord's goodness to all these people. Then he made them a feast and they ate and drank. So Isaac is ahead. He's okay. I've got no animosity toward you. I'm going to do this. So in the morning they rose early and exchanged oaths. Then Isaac sent them away and they departed from him in peace. Now it came about on the same day that Isaac's servants came in and told him about the well which they dug and said to him, we have found water. So he called it Sheba. Therefore the name of the city is Beersheba to this day. Again, same thing. Beersheba was well of the sevens, and here they call it Sheba, which is related to Shabbat, which is related to Sabbath, 7. And again, it's in Beersheba, where Abraham was. So, in all of this chapter, we see Isaac following the pattern of his father, but God following the pattern of God, faithful in protecting him, protecting the covenant, protecting the promise. Even in Isaac's fear, lack of trust, coming through, fighting over wells, God giving him water, not causing a fight. And then Abimelech comes and says, surely you are of the Lord and you're much greater than we are. We need to find out how to way to protect ourselves from you and make a covenant. So God is causing all the nations of the earth to come around. He's causing the nations of Canaan to come around and respecting Abraham and Isaac and really paying homage to them because this is their land. That's what it's going to end up being. But then we get to verses 34 and 35. The last two verses, something completely different. When Esau was 40 years old, remember he's twins with Jacob. Twins with Jacob. And now he's 40 years old. He married Judith, the daughter of Beeri the Hittite, and Basemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, and they brought grief to Isaac and Rebekah. So Jacob and Esau were born as twins. Isaac was the only one born of Abraham and Sarah, child of promise. He waited 40 years to get a wife. Now God doubles the blessing, and so Isaac has 2 children, Jacob and Esau. After 40 years, Esau gets married. But unlike the child of promise, which is going to be Jacob, we're going to see this in Genesis, he purchased the birthright, remember? Isaac despised his birthright. I don't want any part of that. So he despised what was in store for him, and his God, his birthright was worth a bowl of soup. So when Esau was 40 years old, he married Judith, the daughter of Beeri the Hittite, and Basemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite. He married people from the land of Canaan. That's what Isaac said, no, you never do that. You don't do that. Abraham sent to get a wife for Isaac, not from the land of Canaan. Well, this is the same problem. Isaac certainly knew you don't get a wife from the land. Esau did. He married Judith, the daughter of Beeri the Hittite, and Basemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite. And you know what the issue is? They brought grief to Isaac and Rebekah. Grief. Because Esau went and did what his grandfather Abraham said you never do. You don't get a wife from here. You go back to your family. And that's what we're going to see Jacob end up doing. But for now, we see at 40 years old, Esau decided, to marry some locals. And it brought great grief to his family in disobedience because he despised his birthright, which means he despised the stories, he despised his heritage, he despised all what this is coming to. He didn't look forward to it. He wanted now. He wanted a bowl of soup now. He wants his satisfaction now. He doesn't want the promise. So he is saying, I don't care. I don't care anymore. And so his decisions brought grief to his father, the child of the promise. So we're starting to see a drifting of Esau away from the promise and the covenant. Isaac is still going, and he's now getting kind of older now. He had his first children at 60. So if you think about it, he had these children at 60 years old, just turning back just a little bit. Chapter 25, verse 26, Isaac was 60 years old when she gave birth to them, Jacob and Esau. Now what we see is, when Esau was 40 years old, he married Judith. So how old is Isaac? 100 years old. When his firstborn, Esau, decides to marry locals and bring great grief to his parents. Because he doesn't care about what the future holds. He doesn't care about the hope, and he doesn't care about the promised land. That's what we read about Esau, remember? No root of bitterness springing up. Godless person like Esau, who despised his birthright. Sought repentance with tears, but he couldn't find it. When you despise the hope, despise the future, despise what God has in store for us because you want something now, this is where it leads. You will be filled with bitterness, anger, and you'll have grief, and you'll sow grief to all those that you love. When you despise the hope, you don't look to the hope as your solution. You want something now, and you want yours now. But when you are looking forward to the hope, look how God protects. Look how God is with Isaac. Even though he followed the same footsteps as Abraham, he kept saying, I'm with you, and I'll protect you. That's what we see in Genesis chapter 26. And I hope you join us then when we get the next devotion in Genesis chapter 27. Thank you.